Chapter 24, Feudal Society. Now, after the raids of the Vikings, there was no strong central government in Western Europe. Basically, things were pretty seriously messed up. Main leaders were nobles who owned a lot of land, and basically this led feudalism, which was government by landowning nobles. Feudalism divided people into three different groups. There was the clergy, they helped the poor and the sick. The nobles, they protected and governed and enforced the laws. Either of those two was better, though, than being one of the peasants or the townspeople. They supported the other two by doing the farming and by doing service for them. Basically, these guys here, vast majority of the population. Land and government. The Franks were the first to give fiefs or estates in exchange for service and loyalty, and this became the practice in Western Europe, so we can kind of thank Charlemagne for that. Rise of feudal territories. After Charlemagne's death, there was no central authority, so nobles became more and more powerful, and kings were weaker, and some nobles became more powerful than the actual kings they were supposed to be serving. Around 1000 AD, there were many small feudal kings that were ruled by nobles. So these are some smaller, these are actually some of the larger ones, but a lot of smaller internal ones as well. Now, nobles had power to make and enforce laws. Rich people made the rules. Most people were peasants and townspeople and did not have really any power. And people believed that nobles ruled because God wanted it that way. Because, with the rich, they should benefit because they're rich and God wants them to be rich. And if you don't respect them, you're not obeying God's laws. Lord and vassal. Now, vassals were a noble who served a lord of a higher rank. They were protected and given a fief by their lord in return for service and loyalty. Now, an act of homage was what they did to indicate that they had that relationship of loyalty and service. So, the vassal had to help the lord in battle, had to make payments on special occasions, and pay ransom if the lord was captured. Now, vassals also had to entertain the lord when he visited and serve in the lord's court. Vassal's land could be taken away if he didn't do his job. And when a vassal died, the fief went to the oldest son after another act of homage, so keep it in the family. The nobility. Around 800 to 1100 AD, they had wooden houses, the nobles did, with only one room for everything, and a palisade, a wooden fence around for protection. But they eventually developed castles, which are these large, stronger stone buildings. And castles had drawbridges and portcullises if they were fancy, and to prevent entry. The keep was the internal part. This is the strongest part of the castle. Thick walls and could be defended if the rest of the castle was lost. Castles are said to be self-sufficient for months in cases of siege, and many other people worked in castles, including servants and officials. And during the castle period, the nobles would hold court, hunt and fish, and played games like chess. Ladies were expected to obey their husbands. Marriages were usually arranged to unite powerful families. It was not about love, it was about keeping land and getting land. Often, women were married by 12, and women with large dowries were considered the most desirable. So dowry was essentially the land that she brought with her into marriage. Most of the time, the women raised the children, but if the lord was away, she had more say in the way that the castle was run. Knighthood. Most nobles had trained to become knights, which were soldiers on horseback. Knights had to follow certain rules, which is the code of chivalry. These are all the different parts of a knight's armor. And had to, for the code of chivalry, that emphasized loyalty, bravery, respect, and compassion for the poor. Training. Nobles started training at 7 years old by being a page, which was someone who helped the knight's horses and cleaned his armor. And after learning to be a page for a while, they became a squire, which was one who aided a knight at 15 years old. If they fought well, they would be made a knight in a ceremony called a dubbing. Now, tournaments, they were pretty nasty, but the whole idea was that tournaments could be bloody affairs because they were used to train knights. And this is an example here, sort of like Full Metal jousting going on, but the real thing, without the medical care after the problem, or with very low medical care. And skill, strength, endurance, all these different things, jousts, hitting with swords and such. But it was supposed to be in a controlled way to make sure that people didn't get too badly hurt. Now, tournaments helped to show off how good a fighter they were, but they were pretty expensive because sometimes people did get hurt or even killed. The manor, the land was very important in feudalism, and a fief was given to the nobles, and they established manors. Now, peasants, knights, and nobles all lived on manors, and you can get an idea of the different parts of the manor right here. You got barns, you got a blacksmith, a bakehouse, a mill, all these things like that, and certainly the fields. Daily life. Nobles needed help so they had a seneschal, who was someone who visited each of the nobles' fiefs to check on them, and a bailiff made sure that peasants were working hard. Manors were isolated, and so they had to do pretty much everything for themselves. Nobles lived in a nice house or a castle. Peasants lived in nearby villages in one-room houses. And villages usually had a church, a mill, an oven, and a wine press. The difference between freemen and serfs was freemen could move around but weren't stuck on the land, but they could be thrown off the land. Now the serfs, they were part of a noble's property along with their kids. He had to provide service of the nobles, to the noble, but he couldn't be kicked off the land, so there was a relationship there. Serf could become a freeman by escaping to a town and staying there for a year or later, and they could buy their freedom. Sunday was the only day off, and by about 1200s there was better farming techniques, and that made food more available. That led to a population increase.